So let's move to GS2. So GS2, obviously the first part is polity. So definitely polity means you all know that articles and constitutional amendments become non-negotiable. So articles and constitutional amendments. So how did I do this? Everybody knows that articles and CAs are important and everybody reads them and they kind of remember them, but what happens is that when you go into the examination hall, you kind of forget. That is there. And what happens is that last time there was a question in GS2, it was about NALSA. NALSA means free legal aid. So one obvious thing everybody quotes was NALSA as part of directive principles of state policy. That everybody writes. But what many people didn't write was, right to free legal aid is also part of Article 21. That is right to life. When you open Lakshmikant and you see the list of rights that have been given under Article 21, you will also find right to free legal aid. Many people will write definitely right to free legal aid as part of directive principles of state policy, but not many will write it as part of Article 21. This is where the difference comes up. When the examiner sees that you have also included right to free legal aid as part of Article 21, he will understand that you have some sense of deeper understanding. This is very basic. This is right from Lakshmikant, but not many people will remember it, or people will not be able to reproduce it. So this is how you have to become extremely thorough with articles and CAs. It's not just cursory reading, or it's not just remembering few of the details, but it's about thoroughly understanding each of them and applying them in the exam-like environment. That is extremely important. And second is definitely statements given by famous personalities can be used as conclusions or intros. For instance, Indianization of judiciary was a term that was given by some Chief Justice, former Chief Justice. Like, you might have read it in newspapers. And then you have to note these things down. Like when somebody, a prominent personality, is giving a statement, somebody like CJIs or somebody like commissioners of constitutional bodies are given statements, you have to note them down and then you have to use them appropriately when the question is asked. Like for instance, many election commissioners, chief election commissioners give you statements. You have to note them down, and whenever a question comes on election commission or problems related to election commission, you can use it. So that is what I did. Whenever any prominent personality gave it, I used it to take them up from newspapers and I used to note them down and I used it to quote them. That is extremely important because it gives credibility. If you are writing just another statement without quoting the person who has actually given it, I feel it gives more credibility if you are quoting the original person who has given that, and if you are you are writing a question on judiciary, and if you are quoting CJI, that is the best way to gain credibility, right? I mean, that is a very good way to end the answer also. So that is something very important. And next is, I'll go to international relations. So again, another area where frameworks become important is in international relations. Framework is definitely very easy, like bilateral relations or multilateral bodies. You will have something like political relations, you will have economic relations. Within economic relations, you have something like trade, you have something like investments. And you can have something like cultural relations. You can have something like people-to-people relations. You can have even technological relations. You have strategic relations. You have security relations, defense relations. You can also write something like cooperation on multilateral organizations. Etc. So this is a standard way for you to prepare all your notes for international relations between any countries or even for multilateral organizations. Another important thing in international relations is that you have to update your notes constantly. So you might take up a topper notes and you might see that you have all this content already, and then you will just read it, or you kind of incorporate it into your notes. But that is not going to give you marks because you have to update your content constantly because international relations is a dynamic subject. So whenever India-US relations is there, gone are the days you are going to quote something like trade wars, or not trade wars, but trade deficits or problems on the front of trade, etc. You have to quote something on the lines of cooperation on 5G, cooperation on critical minerals, cooperation on supply chains, etc. These are the elements that are coming up these days, right? You are listening them in newspapers these days. When you are not updating your notes that is already in this framework with these points, it is not going to give you marks. So it's extremely important that you constantly update your notes with these specificities. So always ensure that when you are making already, if you have notes already for international relations, that is good. You have a set notes in a framework, and then you just have to update the frameworks with recent happenings. That is extremely important. Another thing that is extremely important for international relations is the terms. Just like society, international relations also requires usage of terms. So what do I mean by terms? Again, you have to use something like net security provider. You have to have the India's foreign policy for different regions on tips. Something like Act East is a very basic thing, and something like Central Asian Connect is also there for Central Asian regions. That is the second part. And third is something like Gujarat Doctrine for the neighborhood. Something like Sagar policy for the maritime security. Something like Mausam for again maritime thing. So India's foreign policy have to be in tips. Whenever a question is asked on something like neighborhood, you have to definitely mention Gujarat Doctrine. If you are not mentioning Gujarat Doctrine, I feel the answer is incomplete. So terms are extremely important for international relations, just like security. So whenever you are encountering such terms, do collect them, keep them handy and revise them properly so that you can use them in your answers. Something like Global South, you listen a lot. That is there. Something like NATOization. NATOization was used in the context of many members, European members getting admitted into NATO again. So this is another term that was there in the news. De-Americanization is another term. What is de-Americanization? It is a term basically to show the declining global power status of USA. So that is another term. And then something like G0. G0 is also used. What is G0? You know G7, G20, also all such things, right? Because of the declining credibility of multilateral organizations, G0 is a term that is coming up wherein countries are reluctant to cooperate on multilateral grounds. So that is another example. So these are kind of terms I'm telling to use it in international relations because they definitely give you an edge. These are again basic things, but you will forget them to use them in the examination hall under exam pressure conditions. So you have to have them on your tips, revise them constantly. That is important. And then apart from that, there is governance in paper 2. So governance, what happens is that governance is a very easy topic. You will find governance notes from anywhere like e-governance, citizens charters, or something like social audit. This is a very easy topic. But how do you differentiate your answers from others? That is important again. So here what happens is that case studies and best practices are important. Case studies and best practices. So you need to collect best practices for each of the sections mentioned in the syllabus. For instance, something on e-governance, you have to collect a case study showing how e-governance was adopted in a particular organization or something on these lines. For every topic, if you collect such case studies, you can use them handily whenever a question is asked. Apart from that, another thing that is important is organicity in your answers. So what do I mean by organicity? So many times what happens is that your answers tend to become technical in governance. When you're reading something like e-governance, you read up material on e-governance and you quote the solutions that are already there about e-governance from the material. So this is the technological problem with respect to adoption of e-governance and you'll use it. But that is not how I did it. I did it in a very organic way. I stood in the legs of administrator. If I was an administrator in an organization where e-governance adoption was a challenge, what would I do? So if I thought from that perspective, my solutions were very natural. They were not copied from somewhere, or they were not very technical. They were not something that didn't have any practical relevance. So this is extremely important. That is, keep your answers very natural in governance, because ultimately governance is nothing but what you would do after once you get into administration. So for that, instead of taking up solutions from the notes or books or just copy pasting them, it's important that you yourself think from the point of view of an administrator and then come up with very natural organic solutions. That is important. It doesn't take much effort. You just have to think and then come up with organic solutions. That is what I did for governance in that sense. And this is it for GS2. Any specific questions? Social issues. Social issues, okay. What I did was, so I again prepared notes for each vulnerable section. Whether it is children, whether it is disabled, whether it is minority communities, whether it is caste groups that are suppressed or any such things, I prepared notes. Again, the notes included all such things, like for instance, demographic parameter, that is how much of the population they constituted. And then I also included something on the lines of their problems. Within problems, you need to have a framework. That is, what were the historical problems? What are the political problems? Political problems in the sense, some of the, obviously they don't have enough political representation. They are politically suppressed. They don't have enough social capital to form political groups. So this is what you will write. And then you will have economic problems. Economic problems in the sense, you can write something on the lines of labor force participation rate, something on the lines of sticking to traditional occupations like agriculture or something, and they not having enough representation and other economic activities. That is something. And you can also write something like discriminatory practices towards them. That you can also write as a problem. And then in the problems, you can also quote something like probably access to justice and other such things. Access to justice, resources, and other such things. That is how they are marginalized. So that is another problem. So when you're preparing problems, prepare in this framework. You need to have a framework for every problem that you're writing. So that is important. And then you'll write the solutions. Here in solutions, it's again extremely important to quote the committee reports or something like that. For instance, there is something called Sachar Committee, Ranganath Mishra Committee, Jaya Jaitly Committee, like who proposed increasing the age of marriage for women. So that you can quote in women section. So and all such things. These committees are extremely important. You have to note them down separately because you think you will remember them, but it's extremely difficult to get them out in the exam-like environment. So you kind of have to write them separately and revise them continuously. So that is another thing. And then you can also include a page on what are the government efforts that have been done and what more can be done. That is way forward. So this is what I did for vulnerable sections when it comes to social issues. And apart from that, most of this social issues gets overlapped into your GS1 society aspect, where you will do something like poverty, hunger, and all such things. So this overlap, I think it's better you read social issues in, when you're reading society part. That gives you more holistic perspective instead of dealing with it in a separate way. So that is how I dealt social issues. And any other question? What are the sources I referred, okay. Sources for social issues was basically, I had Topper's notes. I think I remember doing it from Dhatri Reddy ma'am notes that I referred. So this was one source, and apart from that, I referred Topper's notes only, mostly Shruti Sharma ma'am's notes. And I took value addition from newspapers and current affairs compilations. So this was what I did for social issues, notes.
Natural solution, does it applicable to only for governance
I mean, you can do it for any section also, but I feel governance is something that has to be natural. In the sense, what do I mean by natural? Natural is practically applicable. So once you go into the administration, you are not going to replicate the solutions that are in the textbook if they are not, practically worth it. So I'm telling it in this case specifically because, governance case specifically because that is important in that case. It's not like you cannot do it for other sections like society or anything, but for governance, that is something that is mandatory is what I feel. Yeah. Any other questions?